Okay, so thank you for joining, guys. Um, you may have heard before this idea, but I just want to expand on it a bit more. This week's Parsha, as you all know, is Tetzaveh, and there's something profoundly unusual about this Parsha. And we may know about it, but maybe we don't reflect on it enough. And that is that from the moment that Moshe Rabbeinu is born, and we're introduced to Moshe in a Sefer Shemot, in fact, Parshat Shemot, until the very end of the Torah, there's only one Parsha in which his name does not appear, and that is, yes, that is this week's Parsha of Tetzaveh. Not once do we read the name Moshe, not once do we see his name written explicitly in this Parsha. And yet we know that the entire parsha is spoken to him. So it says, it starts, V'ata tetzaveh, you shall command. V'ata hakrayv elecha, you shall bring near. V'ata tedaber, you shall speak. So we have the pronoun you, and that you is obviously referring to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moshe. So his name is absent, but his presence, his actual presence, is overwhelming. He's very much still in the picture. And I want to try in the shiur in the 30 or so minutes that we have to explore this parsha in depth, but really through if you like through five major themes. Boaz, lovely to have you. Um, So the one is the disappearance of Moshe's name. The other is the oil and the menorah. The other, third one being the garments of the Kohen Gadol, the sounds of the bells, and that was on one of the items of clothing. There were bells on his coat of the Kohen Gadol, and the meaning of tamid, of consistency. There was a flame that always need to be lit. So I want to explore those themes, and hopefully through going through those themes, we'll be able to uncover a powerful message about ego, about leadership, about resilience, and about spiritual endurance. So let's start with the first idea, the first theme, and the idea of Moshe's name not being in this week's parsha. So I actually mentioned in Shul, one of these past days, that the Bal HaTurim famously connects Moshe's absence, or the name of Moshe, in this week's parsha, to the words after the sin of the golden calf. And if you remember, Hashem threatens to destroy the Jewish people because of this heinous crime. And Moshe pleads to Hashem and he intercedes to Hashem and he tries to beg mercy that the Jewish people should be spared. And ultimately, Moshe says to God that if he's not going to forgive them, if he can't see fit to forgive the Jewish people, "Mecheni na mesifracha asher kasafta." He says, then erase me from your book obviously meaning the Torah, erase me from your book that that you have written. Sorry. Moshe places himself on the line for his beloved children, for Bnei Yisrael. And we know, obviously, ultimately, that the Hashem does forgive the Jewish people. Nevertheless, we know that a tzaddik, a righteous individual, the words of such a person are powerful. And a declaration made, even if it's conditional, leaves a spiritual mark, leaves a spiritual imprint. And so one parsha exists, our parsha of Tetzaveh, in which Moshe's name is actually erased. We don't find the name of Moshe. But it certainly can't just be a technical fulfillment of a Moshe statement. The Torah doesn't operate in these sort of superficial ways. If Moshe's name disappears, there must be something fundamental that's being revealed about Moshe himself. And we need to think about what Moshe actually says when he says to God, erase me from your book. He's saying that if the Jewish people don't survive, then I don't want to survive. In other words, my greatness, the person I am, says Moshe, means nothing without them. My Torah means nothing without them. My whole destiny is inseparable from them. Moshe sees his destiny as not something that's individual or individualistic, but it's covenantal. It's based on something much larger than himself. Certainly doesn't see himself as a celebrity or as a spiritual celebrity. He sees himself as part of the nation. He's part and parcel of the nation. And therefore, in the parsha that establishes the priesthood, the long-term spiritual structure of the Jewish people, Moshe steps aside. Moshe disappears. Because the ultimate leader, what Moshe is teaching us, is that the ultimate leader doesn't which I'm looking for, doesn't take the limelight, doesn't cling to the spotlight. He builds structures, he builds institutions that are going to outlive him. Just as an aside, as I'm thinking, you can think of so many politicians, leaders of countries. I think many African countries come to mind, where you've got leaders in their 80s or whatever the case may be, um, nothing about who's going to take over, nothing about leadership after them. It's all about me. I am leadership. I am the leader. I am the destiny of the people. Moshe was exactly the opposite. And it's so deeply countercultural because, again, the world is obsessed with name recognition. We live in a world where visibility is so important, branding, personal legacy. And Tetzaveh, our Parsha, teaches something that greatest impact can actually come when the name disappears. So Moshe's name, yes, is absent, but his influence is felt in every verse in this week's parsha, and this really is true greatness. The parsha says, "Vayichu elecha," they shall take for you, and it's actually and I'm still going to come back to this concept of Moshe and leadership, but I just want to go on to something else briefly. The parsha says, "Vayichu elecha shemen zayit zach katit lamaor," that you should take to you pure olive oil crushed for illumination. That's the literal translation. Take to you pure olive oil crushed for illumination. And the Midrash notes something unusual. Why does it say take to you? The oil is for the menorah. It should say they shall take oil. Give the oil to the menorah. Why to you? Why does it say Vayichu elecha, take it for you? And the answer is that Moshe represents Torah, right? Moshe is the embodiment of Torah. He's the one who gives over the Torah from Hashem to the people. The menorah also represents Torah. It represents also wisdom. And the oil represents the Jewish people. And the message is an important one and quite profound, that the people must bring themselves, meaning refined and pure, to the Torah in order to produce light. We know that oil doesn't shine on its own. We know that it requires a wick. It requires some structure. It requires direction. Potential isn't light. Refinement is light. And we need to also see what the pasuk, what the verse says about how the oil is actually produced. Katit, meaning it's crushed. Only through crushing does the oil emerge. The Zohar says something quite extraordinary. The Zohar says, just as the olive releases its oil only when pressed, so too the Jewish soul reveals its deepest light under pressure. And so Jewish people throughout history have been likened to the olive. And if you think, unfortunately, we don't have to stretch our minds too much to be able to think of crushing moments throughout our history, exiles, the persecution, the displacement, the Holocaust, 7th of October. So many, unfortunately, come to light, Bondi. And yet, when you look at what emerged, we look at the Talmud Bavli, the great Babylonian Talmud emerging in exile. We think of the great personalities, Rambam, Maimonides, Rashi, the Code of Jewish Law, Shulchan Aruch. Communities rebuilt from ashes. We have the establishment of the state of Israel. And that's showing that faith refuses to die, that crushing does not destroy the Jewish soul, but quite the opposite. In fact, it reveals it. But we should also note that, the oil also needs to be zach. And the word zach means pure. And not every reaction to pressure produces light. Sometimes, unfortunately, pressure produces bitterness, anger, sometimes cynicism. And again, we can't even judge that. because these are natural reactions and emotions. But what the Torah is asking of us, what the Torah demands of us, is that word refinement, bring purity. That yes, there may be pain, unfortunately, but pain must become purpose. Pressure must become clarity. Struggle must become light. Struggle must become illumination. And the menorah stood in the Mishkan, the menorah stood in the tabernacle, a place already filled with the divine presence. And we can ask, why did it need light? And the Midrash says that the light was not for Hashem. It was testimony to the world that the Shekhinah dwells amongst the Bnei Yisrael, amongst Israel. In other words, what's it saying? The Jewish light is outward facing. We don't shine to validate ourselves. We shine to testify to Hashem's presence. And that's the message of the oil. Again, I'll link this back again to the concept of Moshe Rabbeinu, the concept of his name disappearing as well. If you look at the big day kuna, and again, there's a lot of detail in this parsha of the clothing, the special clothing that the priests and the high priest wore. A lot of detail in this week's parsha, and we can ask the question: why so much space? Why so many paragraphs, columns in the Torah devoted to clothing? And really, the answer is because in Judaism, clothing isn't merely superficial. Clothing expresses one's role, it expresses responsibility. You know, there's an old expression or the old saying, I don't know who actually said it, clothes make it the man. And to a large extent, Judaism would subscribe to that. Judaism would go along with that. So the Torah says regarding these big day kuhuna, these garments of priesthood, they were lechavod uletif'aret, for honor and for beauty. Honor in this context means dignity, and beauty means harmony. And again, if you look at the garments closely, so you had the ephod, the apron, and the choshen, which was speaking about carrying the people. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, wore the names of the 12 tribes, right? The 12 tribes of Israel in two places. Firstly, he had them on his shoulders, on the straps on his shoulders, and there they were engraved on two stones. And then we know on the breastplate, on his heart, Alev, Alibo, on his heart, he had 12 stones, and on each stone was engraved one of the tribes. So again, if you think of why on the shoulders, so we think of shoulders, you know, you say a person's got broad shoulders. Shoulders is a symbol of responsibility. Of course, on the heart, we know that heart symbolizes compassion, caring, loving. So leadership comprises both of these elements. It's weight bearing, it's taking the load for sure, but it's also, if I can use the expression, and if there is the expression, heart bearing, you know, compassionate, it has to be feeling. Ramban Nachmanides, he notes, and we actually know it from the text itself, that each stone was different. There were different colors, different qualities, different types of stones. And that in itself teaches us something so important. It wasn't just one stone, all the same. And I've mentioned this concept before, that unity doesn't mean that we're all the same. Unity doesn't mean sameness. The Jewish people are not meant to be one color. We're meant to be many colors. We're meant to be different. And the role of the Kohen Gadol is not to erase differences, but he brings them together. He sanctifies them. And what he says, and what we should know, is that every tribe mattered. Every personality and person counted. Every stone was necessary. And all of the stones were set in that breastplate, which sat literally touching above his heart. And again, if we just think of the times that we're living in, unfortunately, where you think of so much fragmentation, you just need to go on social media, unfortunately. Maybe it's a good idea to stay off. And you just see fragmentation, ideological fragmentation, political disagreement, communal. Unfortunately, there's just so much. And what we learn out is you carry the nation on your heart. And this applies to all of us, right? We say that we're supposed to be responsible one for each other. Ahavat Yisrael, we're supposed to love each other. So we have in our heart not only those who look like us, who may be the same color stone, but even those who may be different. We all count, we all matter, we all have to be taken into heart. We all have to care about everyone, no matter how different or similar they are to us. And of course, the Kohen Gadol being the leader, being the one that represented Am Yisrael, right? He begged atonement for the whole nation on Yom Kippur. He represented this all, and we need to do this obviously as well. Now, that the high priest, I mentioned that, who do I need to mute there? A second. Okay, I think everyone's on mute. I'm not sure who that was. The Me'il. So the Me'il was a coat worn by the high priest, and it had on its hem, it had bells and pomegranates on its hem. And interesting, the verse said, "Venishma kolo beva'o el hakodesh," that when the high priest would come to the holies, he would make a noise. He couldn't just come there unannounced. In fact, there's a beautiful concept. I think it's a Rashi that brings it down, if I'm not mistaken. I think it is Rashi, to say it's a concept of derech eretz. That even though God knew that Aaron, the high priest, was approaching, you don't just walk in. It's like knocking on the door before you enter someone's room and the door's closed. That's the one concept of derech eretz, of respect, of courtesy. But also, the Gemara tells us that obviously these bells, okay, the Gemara doesn't tell us, but the bells make a noise, and there are a few things we need to learn out from that. But the Gemara says that the bells on the robe atones for Lashon Hora, right? The sounds that our mouths make, the incorrect speech. So in other words, sound repairs sound. But there's actually something more, I think anyway, more profound, and that the Kohen Gadol doesn't enter silently. And what I mean by this is that leadership, or maybe even a stronger word, power has to be accountable. Holiness has to be transparent. It can't be silent. If you think about in the ancient worlds, priests worked in secrecy. There was the sense of mystery. The more mystery there was, the more power there was. But Torah's opposite. Torah insists when the Jewish leader enters a sacred space, his footsteps are heard. He makes a sound. He doesn't sneak into the Holy of Holies. He doesn't sneak into sanctity. He announces himself. And again, that's a profound lesson about leadership and about responsibility, is that influence must be audible. Actions of a leader must resonate. Presence must be accountable. And the bells remind the Kohen Gadol that every moment has consequences. And of course, the higher or the more prominent, the more important you are on that social ladder, so to speak, your actions, your sounds carry that much more weight. They resonate, they echo so much more. And the Kohen Gadol, being the highest of the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people, his actions, even small, even minor ones, carry so much weight. Okay, the tzitz. Also mentioned this briefly in shul during the week. The tzitz was a golden plate that the Kohen Gadol wore on his forehead. It was literally worn all the time, except when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies. Then he only wore white, and the gold wasn't permitted. But otherwise, he wore this golden plate on his forehead called the tzitz, not to be confused with tzitzit, that the strings that we wear on our garment. And on this tzitz was engraved the words Kodesh LaHashem, holy to Hashem. So it's literally on his forehead, which is the seat of thought, the beginning of everything, right? Thought precedes speech, thought precedes action. And the message is very, very sharp. Is that even our thoughts, right, which no one knows about except God, even our thoughts, which are still within the realm of self, within ourselves, has to be aligned with holiness. Even our public image must declare allegiance with Hashem. And again, as I said, the high priest represents the Jewish people. We must always have holiness uppermost in our mind. And what I mean by that is not just at the moments of clear spirituality, when we're coming to shul, when we're davening, when we're putting on tefillin, when we're lighting Shabbos candles, that's only the moments of holiness. But we need to be in our mind that where we can apply holiness to every aspect of our life, just as the high priest carried that message wherever he went all the time. It has to be something that we're always aware of, and making sure that every action, even the most mundane of everyday life, has that portion of spirituality, that spirituality is imbued to even the mundane moments of our lives. We have this concept of tamid. There's a concept of Eish al Mizbeach Tukad Bo, that the fire on the Mizbeach had to be perpetually alight. And we also have the concept of the menorah that it speaks about a ner tamid, a constant flame. But it's interesting too to note that the Gemara actually explains that it was lit each afternoon and it burned through the night. So that would seem to be a contradiction, right? It says ner tamid, perpetual light, but the Gemara tells us that it was lit every afternoon and burned through the night. So what is tamid? What does perpetual, eternal actually mean? And what it means, it doesn't mean uninterrupted, but what it means is consistent. And the important message is Judaism doesn't demand constant ecstasy, right? That we always absolutely 100% plugged in, like our cell phones, 100% battery. We're fallible. We're not always going to be absolutely infused or ecstatic, but it demands faithfulness. It demands us to be faithful at all times, to be consistent. Yeah, our levels may dip, they may wane, but those levels have to be there. The flame has to be there all the time. And the korban tamid, the perpetual sacrifice, was offered twice daily. It was every day without exception. And again, there wasn't spectacle with it. There wasn't drama. It was just a daily devotion. And of course, we don't have the sacrifices today. Our prayers take the place of that. But our actions and how faithful and how loyal we are to God, and those concepts, as I mentioned, of kedusha, of holiness, that has to be constant. That has to be consistent. And again, if I just parallel or contrast this to the generation that we live in, it's a generation that's addicted to intensity and like an adrenaline rush. You need the instant fix. We always want inspiration. We want to feel emotionally high all the time. We want dramatic experiences all the time. But the Torah is telling us it's built on the tamid, the daily prayers, the weekly Shabbos, the festivals, the daily and the lifelong mitzvot. The greatness of a Jewish person isn't measured in the moments of ecstasy. It's not how many moments of Yom Kippur did you experience and how amazing and how inspired did you feel, although of course that's important, but it's measured in the days and weeks and months and years and decades of consistency. Again, if you just think about a marriage or any relationship that's going to last, it can't just be built on that first under the chuppah or the first anniversary. It's got to be those acts of loving kindness daily, and the person knowing that you're there for them. Again, this is what Judaism is all about: the concept of tamid being more powerful than a world that looks for the spectacular. Um, okay, why I want to go through this quickly, and I'm running out of time. The idea of Moshe as well, name not appearing in this week's Parsha. First of all, I'll actually mention two. One is it was yesterday that was Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, which commemorated Moshe's birth and Yortzeit. And it occurs during this time when you read Tetzaveh every year. So it makes sense that the Parsha that deals with the Yortzeit, the passing away of Moshe Rabbeinu, should hide his name. In other words, why did Hashem, out of all the parashiyot, choose this one to leave Moshe out of? For those who maybe came on late onto the Zoom, I said that at the time of the sin of the golden calf, Moshe was pleading to God, forgive the people. And eventually said, if you can't, wipe me out. You raised me out of your Torah, because without the people, there isn't a me. And even though we know that Hashem forgave the Jewish people, nevertheless, the words of a tzaddik have spiritual import, and his name had to be erased somewhere in the Torah from one parsha. That we understand. But why particularly this parsha? So again, one, Zayin Adar, which was yesterday, is the Yortzat of Moshe Rabbeinu, but also it shows the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, because this Parsha speaks about Aaron. It speaks about the high priest, and it speaks about the sons of the high priest. And we know that this was Aaron. Aaron was the high priest. And Moshe, so to speak, if you can picture it, says to himself, this is my brother's moment. This is my brother's moment. I've had my moments, but this is now directed at Aaron, how he serves, how he's supposed to dress, how the Kohanim are supposed to dress. And now I need to make time for him. And the light needs to shine on him. It doesn't need to shine on me. And again, that's a tremendous aspect of leadership as well. Again, we think we live in a society where how many likes, or maybe it's more so with teenagers, how many likes, how many followers do I have? And it's me and it's my name being out there. And Moshe is telling us that it's actually when you're hidden, you can actually make a lot more. You can make a greater impact. But here he's also hidden for the sake of Aaron, his brother. And here he clothes him, he prepares him. In fact, Moshe even anoints him. Um, and the concept is that true leaders make space for other people. True leaders build other leaders. They don't just keep it all for themselves. They're not threatened by others. They're not threatened by successes. They, in fact, rejoice in shared responsibility. By the way, Aaron was the same. When Hashem appears to Moshe in the burning bush, and Moshe is reluctant to be the leader, and he says, God, I think you've got it wrong here. You should really give it to my more eloquent brother Aaron. And God says, I know Aaron speaks well, but Moshe, I want it to be you. But you should realize that when you go and tell Aaron the news, Aaron is going to run out to you with happiness. He's going to be joyful for you as well. And that was indeed the case. So brothers being able to share in the success of someone else. And again, we're all brothers. We're all part of Am Yisrael. It's so sad. Okay, let me actually just rephrase this. It's wonderful when we come together for, God forbid, something bad. Someone passed away or someone's sick, and we come together, the Shiva house or the hospital or the house. That's tremendous, and it's a big mitzvah. But sometimes we have to ask ourselves, can we also come together for someone's success? Someone did well. It's not us, but it doesn't always have to be us. It could be sharing someone else's delight as well, someone else's success. And that is what Moshe is teaching us. Moshe is teaching us that when ego recedes, light increases. When the name disappears, perhaps presence deepens anymore. And of course, just linking it to next week, and I'll end with this, is that Tetzaveh is also always read before Purim. And we know in Purim we have a parallel that Hashem's name also isn't mentioned, right? We know Hashem is pulling the strings, Hashem's orchestrating, everything is divine providence. But Hashem's name doesn't appear in the Megillah, not even once. And again, the concept being that holiness doesn't mean absence. Holiness means depth. Moshe's name is hidden. Hashem's name is hidden, but the light is unmistakable. And the deepest force in Jewish history, the deepest forces and the deepest forces in Jewish history often operate quietly. Okay, so if I could just end with this, is that we should try, if I could just summarize everything we've just discussed, we don't always have to be in the limelight. It's not always about putting ourselves first. Sometimes we can be in the background, and that can count even more. It's about celebrating other successes, just like Moshe made space for Aaron. It's realizing that the best oil and the greatest light comes from the pressed olive. The Jewish people are like olives. And that's what the Zohar says. And unfortunately, we've been pressed and persecuted so many times in our history, but we've always come back with a shine, with a much better shine. And that flame is Tamid, is eternal. Just like the menorah's light was eternal, just like the Mizbeach's light was eternal. Please God, our light should always be eternal. Please God, Hashem shouldn't make it that we should feel crushed and we should feel pressed in order to give that beautiful light. Please God, we should see the greatest light to come. Please God, that should be very soon with the coming of Mashiach. And why I just said that, because Dan Scher's beautiful profile picture is Mashiach, that's when the eternal light will be there without the crushing pain of the pressed olive. Wishing everyone a good Shabbos, and thank you all for joining. Have a good night.